Marco wasn't just any mechanic, he was a wizard with wrenches. His small shop, tucked away on a quiet street, wasn't much to look at. Paint peeled from the walls and the sign creaked in the wind. But inside, Marco could coax life back into any engine. He was a skinny guy, always covered in grease, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. But lately, the smiles were getting rare. Marco's shop was struggling. Big, fancy garages were popping up all over town, stealing his customers. He worked harder and harder, taking on every job he could get, just to keep the lights on. Marco lived behind the shop in a tiny, cramped room. His bed was lumpy and his fridge was usually empty. He poured all his money back into the business, buying parts and tools. He dreamed of the day he could finally fix up the shop and make it a place he could be proud of. He loved cars. He loved the way they worked, the way they sounded, the way they could take you anywhere. He knew every nut and bolt, every wire and hose. He could diagnose a problem just by listening to the engine purr or cough. He treated every car that came into his shop as if it were his own, pouring his heart and soul into every repair. He always went the extra mile, often working late into the night, just to make sure his customers were happy and safe on the road. His dedication, however, was starting to take a toll. Marco was exhausted. That night, a beat-up blue pickup truck sputtered into Marco's shop just as he was about to close. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind, elderly woman who lived down the street. Her truck, her only way to get to the grocery store and doctor's appointments, had broken down. "Marco, I don't know what I'm going to do," she said, her voice trembling. "I need this truck to get my medicine." Marco couldn't turn her away. He knew how much she depended on that old truck. "Don't worry, Mrs. Rodriguez," he said with a tired smile. "I'll fix it for you." He promised her it would be ready by morning. She thanked him profusely, offering what little money she had, but Marco refused. He knew she needed it more than he did. So Marco got to work. The problem was a tricky one, a combination of a bad fuel pump and a clogged carburetor. He had to take apart half the engine. He worked through the night, fueled by coffee and sheer determination. The hours blurred together. The only light came from the bare bulb hanging above his workbench, casting long, dancing shadows across the shop. He skipped dinner, not even noticing his stomach rumbling. He lost track of time, completely absorbed in the task. He replaced parts, cleaned components, and tightened bolts. He muttered to himself, coaxing the engine back to life. Finally, as the first hint of dawn peeked through the grimy windows, he turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life, sounding better than it had in years. Marco had done it. The roar of the engine filled the shop, a sweet sound to Marco's ears. He leaned against the truck, wiping the sweat from his brow with a greasy rag. He felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and the coffee had long since worn off. His muscles ached and his eyes burned. He knew he should rest, but he wanted to make sure Mrs. Rodriguez's truck was running perfectly before she arrived. He checked the tires, the lights, and the fluids, double-checking everything. He even washed the windshield, trying to ignore the throbbing in his head. He imagined Mrs. Rodriguez's grateful smile, and that thought kept him going. He pictured her driving safely to the store, picking up her groceries and her medicine. That was all the reward he needed. The sun was now fully up, casting a warm glow over the shop. Marco felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. He knew he couldn't push himself any further. He had to lie down, even if just for a few minutes. He walked towards the front of the shop, intending to grab a quick nap on the old, ripped couch in the waiting area. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the dizziness intensified. The floor seemed to tilt beneath his feet. He stumbled, reaching out for something to hold onto, but there was nothing there. The world began to spin. Marco crumpled to the floor, landing in a heap near the doorway. He was out cold. The bell above the door jingled a few minutes later, but Marco didn't hear it. Mrs. Rodriguez had arrived to pick up her truck. She stepped inside, her face beaming with gratitude. "Marco," she called out, her voice echoing in the empty shop. "Marco, are you here?" She saw the truck parked outside and assumed he was nearby. "Marco, I brought you some cookies," she called again, holding up a small box tied with a ribbon. She walked further into the shop, her smile fading as she noticed Marco lying on the floor. Her eyes widened with alarm. "Oh, dear," she exclaimed, rushing to his side. "Marco, wake up." She gently shook his shoulder, but he didn't respond. He was pale and still. Mrs. Rodriguez's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what to do. She wasn't strong enough to lift him. She ran back outside to her truck, grabbed her cell phone, and fumbled with the buttons, her hands shaking. She dialed 911, her voice filled with panic. "Please, help. A young man is unconscious in his shop. He's not waking up." She gave the dispatcher Marco's address, praying that help would arrive soon. After giving the dispatcher the address, she ran back inside to wait with Marco. She knelt beside him, holding his hand, whispering words of encouragement, hoping he would open his eyes. While Mrs. Rodriguez waited anxiously for the ambulance, a sleek, silver limousine pulled up outside Marco's shop. Isabella, the heiress, stepped out, her designer sunglasses shielding her eyes from the morning sun. Her chauffeur, a tall, imposing man in a crisp uniform, opened the door for her. Isabella had been watching Marco for weeks. She needed someone with his particular set of skills, someone who understood the inner workings of classic engines, and she had heard whispers that Marco was the best. Not for a modern car, though. Her need was much more specific than that. She glanced at the rundown building, a stark contrast to her own opulent lifestyle. She hesitated for a moment, feeling a pang of guilt for not approaching Marco sooner. She had let her own insecurities and fear of rejection hold her back. She smoothed down her expensive dress and walked towards the shop, her high heels clicking on the cracked pavement. She expected to find Marco hard at work, tinkering away at some engine. She was prepared to offer him a deal he couldn't refuse, a chance to work on a project that would not only pay him handsomely but also challenge his skills like never before. But as she reached the entrance, she saw Mrs. Rodriguez kneeling beside a still figure on the floor. Confusion clouded her face. What was going on? And who was that woman? Isabella rushed forward, her initial confusion giving way to concern. "What happened?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. "Is he all right?" Mrs. Rodriguez looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "He collapsed," she said, her voice trembling. "I called 911. An ambulance is on its way." Isabella knelt beside Marco, her expensive dress be damned. She gently touched his forehead, feeling his clammy skin. He looked so pale and vulnerable. She had only seen him from afar, working with focused intensity. But now, seeing him like this, she felt a wave of unexpected sympathy. "Maybe we should try to move him," Isabella suggested, though she wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. "The dispatcher said not to move him," Mrs. Rodriguez replied, clutching Marco's hand tighter. "We have to wait for the paramedics." Isabella's chauffeur, seeing the commotion, approached the shop. "Miss Isabella, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice deep and concerned. "Yes, Robert, everything is." "Complicated," Isabella said, waving him away. "Please wait in the car. I'll be out in a moment." She wanted privacy. She didn't want Robert or anyone else to witness her vulnerability. This was between her, Marco, and whatever was happening to him. She dismissed him because she needed to process this new development alone. She was also acutely aware of how this scene looked and didn't want to be seen as some uncaring rich girl. The silence in the shop was heavy, broken only by Mrs. Rodriguez's quiet sobs and the distant wail of a siren. Isabella paced nervously, her mind racing. She had come to this place with a proposition, a business deal. Now all she could think about was Marco's well-being. She glanced at the vintage car magazine lying on a nearby table, its cover featuring a beautifully restored 1957 Jaguar. It was the same model as the one gathering dust in her family's garage, the car that held so many memories of her late father. That Jaguar was more than just a car, it was a symbol of her family's legacy, a connection to her past. But it had been neglected for years, its engine silent, its body decaying. She had tried to find someone to restore it, but no one seemed to possess the necessary skills and dedication. Until she heard about Marco. She had seen him working on old engines, coaxing them back to life with a passion that reminded her of her father. She knew he was the only one who could bring her Jaguar back to its former glory. And now here he was, lying unconscious on the floor. The irony wasn't lost on her. She needed him to fix something precious, but she couldn't even help him now. Isabella started pacing again, her high heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the concrete floor. "This is all wrong," she muttered to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't how it was supposed to happen." Mrs. Rodriguez, though worried about Marco, couldn't help but overhear Isabella's nervous ramblings. She frowned, wondering what the wealthy woman was talking about. "I needed him," Isabella continued, unaware that she was being overheard. "That Jaguar. It means everything to me. It's the last piece of my father I have left." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "And he's the only one who can fix it. I've seen his work. He has a gift, a magic touch." She ran a hand through her hair, her carefully styled waves falling slightly out of place. "I was going to offer him anything he wanted. Money, a partnership, anything. I just needed him to say yes." She stopped pacing and looked down at Marco, her expression softening. I need him to say yes. The siren wailed louder in the distance, getting closer. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at Isabella with increased curiosity and concern. She felt sympathy for the rich girl and also a little annoyed at her selfish focus. Weren't they supposed to be focusing on Marco? I've been watching him for weeks, Isabella confessed, her voice filled with a mixture of admiration and embarrassment. I know it sounds strange, but I've seen the way he works. He doesn't just fix cars, he brings them back to life. He cares about them. She paused, fidgeting with the hem of her dress. I was scared to approach him. I thought he might think I was just some spoiled rich girl throwing money around. I was afraid he wouldn't take me seriously. She looked down at Marco again, her voice softening. But he's different. He's real. He has a passion for what he does, and that's what I need. He's the only one who can understand what that car means to me. She wiped a tear from her eye, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. I need him to understand. Meanwhile, Marco was starting to stir. The sounds of Isabella's voice, though muffled and distant, were slowly pulling him back from the darkness. He felt a dull ache in his head and a strange tingling sensation in his limbs. He could hear the wail of a siren getting closer and the sound of someone crying. He tried to open his eyes, but they felt heavy and glued shut. He strained to listen, trying to make sense of the fragmented sounds and voices around him. He could barely hear what they were saying, but one thing was clear, someone was talking about him. And they sounded desperate. Marco's mind was a jumble of fragmented images and sounds. He could hear Isabella's voice, clearer now, laced with a desperation he couldn't quite understand. He heard her mention a car, a Jaguar, and something about his magic touch. He struggled to focus, to piece together the puzzle. He knew he was lying on the floor and he could feel the rough concrete beneath his cheek. He could also feel Mrs. Rodriguez's hand holding his, a comforting presence in the midst of his confusion. He slowly managed to pry open his eyes, squinting against the bright sunlight streaming through the shop windows. His vision was blurry, but he could make out the figures of Isabella and Mrs. Rodriguez hovering above him. Isabella's words echoed in his ears, "He's the only one who can understand what that car means to me. I need him to understand." What car? What did she need him to understand? He was a simple mechanic, not a mind reader. He'd never even spoken to this woman before. Why was she so desperate? And why did she think he was so special? Despite his confusion, a flicker of intrigue sparked within him. He had always dreamed of working on classic cars, of restoring them to their former glory. Could this be his chance? Could this wealthy heiress be offering him the opportunity of a lifetime? Or was this just some crazy dream brought on by exhaustion and lack of sleep? He needed to hear more. He needed to understand what was going on. Isabella gasped as she saw Marco's eyes flutter open. Her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and relief. Had he heard everything she had said? She hoped not. But judging by the confused look on his face, it was likely he had caught at least some of her ramblings. "Marco, you're awake," Mrs. Rodriguez exclaimed, her voice filled with joy. "Thank goodness." Isabella quickly composed herself, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "Here, let me help you sit up," she said, gently placing her hand on his arm. Marco groaned as he slowly sat up, his head spinning. He leaned against the wall for support, trying to get his bearings. He looked at Isabella, his eyes filled with questions. "Are you all right?" Isabella asked, her voice soft and concerned. She couldn't help but notice how handsome he looked, even covered in grease and dirt. I think so," Marco mumbled, his voice raspy. "What happened?" "You collapsed," Mrs. Rodriguez explained. "You've been working too hard, Marco. You need to take care of yourself." Isabella reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a bottle of water. "Here," she said, offering it to Marco. "Drink this. It will help." Marco took the water gratefully, taking a long, slow sip. The cool liquid soothed his parched throat. He looked at Isabella again, his confusion slowly giving way to curiosity. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice a little stronger now. "And what were you saying about a car?" The sirens were getting closer, and he knew the paramedics would arrive any minute. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The sirens grew louder, closer. Isabella knew she had to be quick. "It's a Jaguar," she said, her voice earnest. "A 1957 Jaguar. It belonged to my father. It's been sitting in our garage for years, neglected and forgotten. I need someone to restore it, to bring it back to life. And I believe you're the only one who can do it." She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "I know this is a lot to take in, especially after what just happened. But I'm serious, Marco. I'm willing to pay you anything you ask. I just need your help." Marco looked at Isabella, studying her face. He saw the sincerity in her eyes, the genuine emotion behind her words. He could tell she wasn't just some spoiled rich girl looking for a quick fix. She truly cared about this car. He also thought about his struggling shop, his empty fridge, and his own dreams of restoring classic cars. This could be the opportunity he had been waiting for. A chance to not only improve his own life but also help someone else in the process. The paramedics burst through the door, their faces etched with concern. "What happened here?" one of them asked, rushing towards Marco. "I'm all right," Marco said, waving them off. "Just a little tired." He looked at Isabella, a small smile playing on his lips. "Tell you what," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Let's talk about that Jaguar." He would get checked out by the paramedics, of course, but he already knew what his answer would be. He was going to help her. The paramedics insisted on taking Marco to the hospital for a checkup, but he promised to call Isabella as soon as he was released. Mrs. Rodriguez, relieved that he was finally getting medical attention, gave him a warm hug and a knowing smile. A few days later, Marco, feeling much better after some rest and proper meals, stood in front of Isabella's mansion, a stark contrast to his humble shop. He felt a little intimidated but also excited. This was a new chapter in his life, a chance to prove himself and achieve his dreams. Isabella greeted him with a bright smile, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. She led him to the garage where the Jaguar sat under a thick layer of dust, a sleeping beauty waiting to be awakened. As Marco ran his hand over the car's sleek lines, he felt a surge of excitement. He knew this was more than just a job, it was a passion project, a chance to restore a piece of history and bring joy back into Isabella's life. They spent hours discussing the car, its history, and Isabella's vision for its restoration. Marco shared his own ideas, his enthusiasm infectious. Isabella listened intently, her respect for him growing with each passing moment. As they began to work together, a bond formed between them, built on mutual respect and a shared love for classic cars. They laughed, they argued, they learned from each other. Marco discovered that Isabella was more than just a wealthy heiress. She was a kind, intelligent, and passionate woman with a deep appreciation for the past. And Isabella saw beyond Marco's greasy overalls and struggling shop, recognizing his talent, his dedication, and his unwavering commitment to excellence. Perhaps, as they worked together to restore the Jaguar, they would also restore something within themselves, finding a connection that transcended their different backgrounds and circumstances. Perhaps they would even restore a sense of hope to their community, showing everyone that even the most broken things can be made new again and that even the most unlikely people can find common ground and build something beautiful together. The engine had been silent for too long, but together they would bring the roar back to life.